Hello and welcome to another special edition of the OC Forum. As you may remember, we are doing a special series on social media. We already had our very first program in this series, and I am very grateful to welcome guests to the second program in our series. This one focusing on digital marketing and newspapers and journalism and how all that is effective in our new digital age. So with me today, I am very grateful to have Kelsey Ivan, a digital marketing strategist, and Tony Shakwa of the Orange County, Southern California News Group. You're gonna have to watch me on that because I'm always gonna call it the OC Register. Tony heads up the digital strategies for, she's the managing editor of digital for Southern California News Group, which oversees our own founding sponsor, OC Register. So ladies, thank you so much for being with me today.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
So what I'd like to do is, Tony, if it's all right, I'd like to ask you both the same question, but I'd like to start with you. And I just want to get a lay of the land and kind of a general overview. When we talk about digital marketing and digital strategies, we're talking about advertising. And in your opinion, how has advertising changed in this digital age?
So I oversee newsroom efforts. So my background is in editorial. I'm a journalist. So I work with the journalism side of what we're doing. My team, one of the things that we do beyond just making sure that the news has its best presentation on our websites specifically, we look for ways to get that news out to people. And one of the ways that we get that news out to people is through social media. So for us, it's not really advertising on social media, what we're pushing out from the newsroom. It's our own work in the newsroom that's going out on social media. That being said, we do have some overlap with some of our marketing teams and advertising teams to help us use some advertising strategies or marketing strategies to try to get our news into the hands of more people, or more people that news would be relevant to.
And so that's when we're seeing in people's social media feeds or things that are boosted towards us, whatever the hot story of the day is.
Right, the hot story of the day, or it may be based on where you live, so if we know that you're a reader in Irvine and we've got some very strong local news out of Irvine that day, we have tools on the marketing side and the advertising side that can help us reach people in Irvine with that story.
Totally understand. So it's helping you target exactly the readers you want to reach.
Right.
So has that been a big change at all in terms of taking those marketing type strategies in the digital world compared to when you were just print and that's all you had to worry about? Does it change how you're thinking about, say, the headlines you use or the photo you might select?
It has changed things. I think we've had to think a little more deeply since the days of print. So there was an assumption when we were putting together the print newspaper that we would just put everything in there and people would read. The assumption in the newsroom was that people were reading everything. Probably they weren't reading every single thing that we put in the newspaper each day, but they were picking and choosing for themselves what was important or relevant to them. Nowadays it's a little different because people may not even know that a story exists. If they're getting their news primarily from social media or from doing a Google search, for example, they may not even know that we covered a story that would have been relevant to them, and they may miss it entirely unless we're in those spaces. So we're not just thinking about the daily news report that's going into print or going up on our websites, although those are things that we're still spending a lot of time and thinking on. We're also thinking about how do we get it to people who may not have seen the print newspaper or who may not have gone to our website on a day-to-day basis. How do we get that news to them? So it's more levels of things for us to think about.
One of the things that I find really fascinating, and one of the reasons that I held on to my print paper for so long, and why I still look at the e-edition of the Register, is because the placement of a story always gave me a context, if you will. So where I'm looking at a story, and if it's the lead story, may not necessarily be the one that I was most interested, but that context in terms of if it's the lead story, it must be important, was very important and valuable to me. And I would imagine to most readers. Has that changed a lot, and does it help or hurt?
So we still have some of that if the digital readers are reading on our website. So we do have a team of editors who is managing the homepage of the websites. And they're making very similar decisions to what people are making for a separate team of editors is making for the print homepage, right? They're deciding what is the most important story right now for website readers. With social media, it's a little different, right? We don't even know which day you're going to see a story when it's coming in. If you're getting it from social media, you may be 3 days late to a story, and the story may have completely changed by the time you saw that first story on Facebook whenever you came in. So the thinking there is, so the hierarchy is a little different. You may have a little different context. What we try to do on my team is make sure that whatever article you came in on, you've got all that text context within the article. So if you came in on day 3 of a story, we want to make sure that there are links in there to day 2 and day 1 and any other background information that you may need. And that's, significantly different from print, where you only got that day's version of that story and not all the references to the previous coverage in that cycle.
I hadn't even thought about that, but you're exactly right. I'm thinking back specifically to the Register's coverage of little Aiden, who was tragically shot on the freeway. And depending on when you came into that story, you may have gotten very different articles of someone, just the tragedy occurring, and then the police search and the chase and different visuals. So how does that change up how people interact with the paper? If we're not all together of when we're receiving news, we're all getting it at different times and spaces. Does it make it more difficult? Does it make the audience less responsive or more responsive?
I don't think the audience is less responsive. I think there is an audience that comes in on the first day of a story. That's a great example, right? There was a lot of interest and concern about that story. So there were people who were reading it from the first day on and were very invested in, whether suspects would be identified and who did this and what's going to happen with this situation, how to help the family. And as we did all of those kinds of stories, we saw, a lot of readers coming back from day to day on that story. But there were people who came in the middle. And if we've done our job right, they're able to get to those previous day's stories on that. I would say sometimes there is some confusion around that, where maybe in a wildfire situation, a headline from a couple days ago will have a different amount of land that has burned, or different evacuation borders or something. So if you're late to that story, we try to do things where we'll go back and link it up so that it's pretty clear at the top of the story that you're on day or 2 old news.
Which part of the story you're on.
Right, where you can get the most up-to-date information. But yeah, that is it's something that we have to work on the digital team to make sure that that's not confusing. And sometimes the algorithms... And
I'm sure I'm not the only one who looks for how long, like in my feed, how long a story has been in the cycle. So I'm looking for 3 hours versus 3 days.
Right. And sometimes the algorithms work against us on that, right? So if a story is very popular on Facebook, a lot of people are sharing it or engaging with it. Facebook likes to share the stories that are already getting a lot of traffic. So the longer a story has been out there, the more traffic it can generate. And sometimes it'll be sharing, so it looks to you like it's new because it hasn't landed in your feed until today, but it's already a couple days old. So.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up algorithms, because I don't want to leave Kelsey out of this conversation, and I know she's done a heroic job trying to teach me about this. So the algorithms and what we're talking about in marketing and social and digital strategies. I know that the professor from UCI that we had on our first program of this series talked a lot about that, and that we really need to look at some new strategies in terms of transparency with the algorithms and how they work for us and against us. So Kelsey, I put Tony on the spot, but it was really more the question for you. How has advertising changed in this new age?
Yeah, so I mean, advertising has definitely gone through an extensive amount of change in the last 30 years with the internet. When you look at pre-internet advertising, a lot of it was product focused. So you had the Marlboro Man promoting cigarettes, you had Tony the Tiger for cornflakes, you had Ovaltine, you had really product focused advertising. And then when the internet came around, especially with social media, it was a more personal platform. So you transitioned really from product advertising to consumer advertising, especially online, and really focusing on the connection between a consumer and the brand. So that's definitely been one of the big transitions. The other one is data points. I mean, pre-internet, you could guess at a lot of the data points of your consumers. You did have some type of like women's health journal where you would know exactly who your consumer is. But on the internet, you have over 2 billion users every single day on Facebook, 1 billion users every single day on Google, and that provides a lot of data points for digital marketing strategists to really hone in and then provide advice for the businesses or the brands that they represent. And when it comes to algorithms, it is a good tool for digital marketers to understand what is of interest to you, because when we're delivering ads and looking at content, our content is really focused on creating an emotional connection with a consumer or providing the solution to a problem that they have. So that's definitely an advantage. However, I know that Facebook and Google are doing really amazing strides in protecting algorithms. I think it was about 10 years ago, you would have your feed on Facebook be about 80% ads and very little personal interaction from the people that you follow and your friends and things like that. And they have updated those algorithms so that you see more user-generated content rather than advertising. And I think that that'll continue to change.
Well, and to your point, in terms of all these data points, is that why, like for the regular person, is that why it feels to the regular person why it feels more invasive? Because they know so much more about us?
Yeah, I think that it's because tracking software or algorithms don't just live on social media. They also live on browsers and websites and search engines and content marketing, email marketing. Pretty much everywhere that you go online, there's a way to track behavior. And there's the benefit of that, which is that sometimes you really want a dog food brand that's awesome, and then all of a sudden you get delivered a dog food brand. And it takes some of the research and the guesswork out of it, especially because brands who are advertising on social intuitively are some brands that you can trust. And that is one of the negative sides when it comes to online advertising for consumers, is the trust factor.
Well, and you bring up a really good point, and this is something that I know you're both going to have an opinion on. The Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, kind of unveiled this seedy underbelly in terms of the algorithms and what you can trust and how things are being delivered to us. So when we look at the story of Cambridge Analytics and we look at how they're taking those data points and almost using them against us or driving us towards a very specific point of view. Kelsey, I want to start with you. Talk to me a little bit about how that was used to drive behavior or to target behavior.
Well, and I think there is obviously the light and the dark, right, of social media advertising. The dark side of it is that it is, you have websites that are then created to have advertisements on them that are 100% clickbait. There's no substance there. They're just using it to sell your interactions and to feed you content. And that is definitely something that I think that you have to worry about when it comes to what type of content you're being fed.
So can you just describe clickbait a little bit? Like what would I be looking at as, it's probably something I've warned my mom against, but can you just go into it a little bit?
Yeah, and there's different types of clickbait. There's you won't believe this, swipe up to read type of clickbait that then goes to a dummy site that has a bunch of advertisements on it. That's how they're making their money, is that they put an ad on social that has a clickbait message to it. You click over to there and it's just completely just ad driven, and there's not even content, or you have to click to 5 different pages to read the whole story. That's a clickbait website.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
So there's and then
so I
there's
probably
also
really don't need to know what the stars look like now.
Yes, you won't believe how the stars look like now. Probably it's going to look like they looked yesterday.
But now, what about like the feeds, the little pop-ups we get that are take your personality profile, or get a free meme made? What are those clickbait as well?
They are to an extent. I think that some brands can put together, like BuzzFeed. They put together a lot of surveys and a lot of 5-minute recipes and things like that. And their objective for that would be to increase their engagement. And by increasing their clicks and increasing likes, comments, shares, they're thereby increasing their brand on your timeline, because as Tony mentioned earlier, Facebook algorithm picks it up that you are engaging with that content, you like that content, so it's going to feed you more of that content. And that is a tactic, I think, that BuzzFeed does to not only increase their engagement, but then also see what type of content their users are interested in, and then altering their strategy depending upon what is being interacted with the most.
Well,
so there's negative clickbait and positive.
I'll be the first strategic to admit that I love a good BuzzFeed list, of the greatest life hacks that you could have. I've probably bought more than my fair share of Amazon things because of what they have put out there. But Tony,
and the reality is,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, and the reality is that every interaction you have with an article like that, there is a person or brand profiting from that. It's the Amazon, affiliation links, it's the BuzzFeed timeline, etc.
So Tony, that takes us into, this pervasive and invasive data points where they're really honing in on who the audience is down to this micro level. How does good content rise up against something like that so that people are getting news that is from a traditional media source that's maybe going to be, for the lack of a better term, more balanced and less partisan? Is that something you're swimming upstream against every day?
Yep, it's really hard. And I don't blame people for being confused, right? One of the strategies is for those types of sites, those clickbait types of sites or the disinformation sites, is to look like legitimate news, right? They're taking all of the cues that we've had throughout media history about what types of news and information look like and what you can trust, and they're using it against you, right? So I don't blame people for being confused, and it is a challenge for us. So there are lots of things going on in the industry to try to combat that. One of them are some nonprofit groups that are studying the cues that people have about what they can trust, how they feel about media that's presented to them. We are working with a group called the Trust Project that is working with the algorithms, right, to have metadata on legitimate traditional news sites that indicates to the algorithms what's real news that the clickbait sites of the world wouldn't have access to. And also things that users can see. So working on protocols that regular everyday readers who come to our website can see to make sure that we they can tell that we're a trustworthy news organization. And that's things like being able to contact the person who wrote that story, right? If you have a question about the story or you need to follow up because there was something maybe that needs to be added to the story, there's an easy way to contact that reporter. If you're on a site where you can't figure out an email address for anybody who works on that site, that's a big red flag that something is wrong there, right? Our sites are, I mean, you could contact 100 people today about a story if you really wanted to. So there are organizations like that that are helping traditional news sites try to swim upstream against all of those algorithms and all of the industries that are making money off of, you know, misappropriating what traditional news looks like, and we're working with them.
And to follow up really quick, Ariana,
Sure.
on what Tony said, the same is true in the digital marketing world. There are, especially e-com, there are a lot of sites out there that will deliver advertisements for product that is either not legitimate or faulty or poor quality to feed you onto a site to capture your information. And that is something that in the digital marketing world, we're also trying to combat by, again, providing multiple channels of sourcing to prove that the company is a legitimate product.
And so Tony just went into this a little bit, but Kelsey, maybe you could just add on to this. In terms of personal protection, I mean, just practical protection, what should people be looking for in order to protect themselves, or what should they do? Are there things they can do right now that would just protect them a little bit more in the digital world?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of this goes back to what you had mentioned earlier about, you know, feeling like it's invasive in terms of the amount of advertising that you're getting. Facebook and Google are really making strides to protect yourself or manage the amount of advertisements that you receive. One of which is if you've visited a website in the past 2 or 3 months, you'll see you usually get an alert that says accept cookies. For people who don't know what cookies are, cookies is a software that you put on your website that says, oh, I went to this dog food recipe and that's, you know, I went to this dog food website and then I went back to Facebook and now I got a dog food recipe ad on Facebook from the same company. That's cookies. It's saying that they deliver ads to you on either social media or through other websites because you have shown an interest in their website or product. So when you visit a browser, you can manage those cookies. Once you see it below hand, you'll see accept cookies or manage. That's something that you can do. You can remove your browser as receiving advertisements from that company if you choose. So that's one way that you can minimize the amount of ads that you're receiving. Another would be Facebook security settings. I mean, there are privacy settings on Facebook, on Instagram, TikTok, Snap that you can manage yourself. So be sure to check your privacy settings. And then the last one that I would say is a lot of users don't really understand that when you log into a third-party app like Pinterest or OpenTable, that you can log in with your social media account and it'll say log in with Facebook. And most people just press accept, but they don't realize that when you press accept, you are then giving that third-party app the same information that you have listed on your social media. So when it says connect with your social media, right below that, there is a permissions text that if you click, you can then select what type of information you are then providing to OpenTable, Pinterest, etc. So those are just a couple little hacks that I think that users can use to protect themselves.
And in terms of just, you know, where do we go from here? So looking at the trends, and you've given some good advice, and Tony, I want to give you a chance too for, you know, particularly in the world of journalism and where people should really be more thoughtful in the content that they're absorbing. What trends do you see, and what advice would you give to users, which I guess is all of us, and so in the world of social media?
So I would say for in the news world, right, there is some personal responsibility that you can take to try to control what it is that you're getting. If you don't want to be a target of misinformation, you can engage more heavily with traditional news sites that you've already trusted, right? You already know what their background is before you share anything on social media to all of your friends and anyone that you would be extending that to know where the information came from. You know, read the article, know who's paying for that website, what their intentions are on that website. And if you can't tell that from the website that you're sharing it from, that's probably a problem, right? It may not be legitimate news. So I think engaging more with traditional media is probably the easiest way to go about making sure that you have real news in your news feed. Also, like we were talking about, the more you engage with something, the more you're going to get that's like that. So once you've, signed up for your newsletters, or you've signed up to follow your traditional news organizations in your feed, when you see it there, if you interact with it, you'll get more of that in the future. They'll know that theoretically, the algorithm will know that you're a legitimate news user, and that you'll get more stories like that. And be less of a target for the misinformation. So, I think that's the easiest thing for people to do, is just to know where they're getting their information. Even if they like to read the information on Facebook or on Twitter, let's say, to know where that information came to them from. Facebook's not writing anything, so everything is coming from somewhere else. Facebook is just serving it up to you. So knowing what those sources are.
Do you think, Tony, that they'll, and I'm going to preface this for a minute, there was, I watched this fabulous little documentary about Abraham Lincoln and his election, and they were talking specifically about the media, and I had a real aha moment that, they, even back then, they ran a very calculated media campaign to make sure that they were, they got their news out and the information out on both sides of the media. And I didn't quite understand what they meant, but at the time, every city worth its salt had two papers. They had a Republican paper and a Democratic paper. So they worked really hard. Lincoln's team, which is hard to believe in the 1800s, to make sure that they put out news that was on the left and put out news that was on the right, because there were two sources of information that gave you opposing views. But you had this kind of balance, even if the news itself wasn't necessarily balanced. Does it make it harder nowadays that we're talking about mainstream media, that it's we have less and less sources for that, so anyone that tries to be to the opposite of anything seems to be more on the extreme? Do you see that it just consolidating even more, or do you see like the digital the outlets providing that balance? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I do think it's, I think most journalists, though we talk about competition sometimes, most journalists would prefer that there are more legitimate media outlets out there, so that, different reporters can cover the same topic, but they may be looking at it from a different angle. And then if you read that holistically, you'll get a bigger picture. That is harder and harder these days, as there are fewer news organizations, and some topics may be only being covered by one news organization. So it is harder to get sort of both sides of that. One of the things they used to say when I was in journalism school is that if you got complaints from both sides, you must be doing a good job because you were right in the middle. I would say, that's probably where we're at in the newsroom right now. We get complaints from both sides. We're too conservative, we're too liberal, why'd we cover this and not that? So we are always trying to sort of balance those things out and make sure that we're taking that into account. But at the end of the day, what our job is to put out what is factual, and try to eliminate the spin that all of the sides are constantly trying to get us to spin, right? So I do think it's more challenging because there just aren't as many outlets anymore to cover the same topic. But if you have a choice, and you can read multiple outlets, that's also a good way to make sure that you're keeping everybody straight, right? You're fact checking the fact checkers.
Totally agree. I think that that's going to be super important moving forward. So Kelsey, that leaves me with giving you the last word on where do you think trends are taking us?
Well, in terms of social media marketing, I think that we're going to be seeing a lot of integration of AI, artificial intelligence, particularly in conversational marketing. You'll see this where you'll get a message from a page and they'll kind of go back and forth with you on the chat box, especially in Facebook. I think that we will see increases of that. Also, VR, virtual reality, I think that that's going to start playing a part in some of the social media platforms, probably in the next 5 years. And but the biggest change, I guess, in social media marketing in the last 5 years that I'm really supportive of is genuine marketing and quality over quantity. Like I said, about 5 years ago, it was post on social media, and users, particularly millennials, who are statistically more skeptical when it comes to online advertising, have the largest purchase power online, and that's really where companies and new businesses should be focusing on, is that generation. I think that they are hungry for genuine marketing online, and really having a higher quality content in terms of, and that could be visual, it could be informational, etc. But really looking for that going in the future, as opposed to high quality or high amount of
High
posting.
quantity.
There we
Right.
go. High quantity posting.
They do want quality. So
Yes,
and we
high
hear that a
quantity
lot
posting.
for in the millennial, and even I don't even know the name for who's below the millennials, but that
Gen Z.
authenticity. Yeah, Gen Z. So
Gen Z.
well,
Yeah.
Kelsey and Tony, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm sorry, Kelsey, did you have one more thing you wanted to add?
I did. Sorry. I was going to say just my advice for businesses when it comes to really social media marketing is to look at it comprehensively. A lot of businesses think that they have to be on every social media platform, and that's just not the case. You need to be on the platform that fits your brand and providing content that fits your brand. And to really make sure that you have a digital marketing strategist who knows the difference and can direct you in the right way.
Well, and that's why I put a lot of faith in you, Kelsey. So,
Thanks.
and Tony, thank you so much. Kelsey, I can't thank you enough either for joining me today and having this conversation. I think it was really helpful, and I'm very grateful for the practical advice and solutions. I think I'll be headed out to change my filters right now. But thank you both for joining me in the OC Forum today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our viewers, if you missed this live, you'll be able to pick it up later. We'll have it on our social media channels as well as on our website. And please join us again for our final installment of this series, where we're going to dig in a little in detail with a very special guest from Children's Hospital Orange County to talk about mental health, particularly in young children. So don't miss that program, and thank you so much for joining the OC Forum today.